Hey everyone, Harrison Blizzard here. Today I'm doing lentil raspberry chews. So you might say, what is that? We're actually making a dessert type of dish, but we're using lentils. So before you exit out this video and you're thinking, why would lentils be in the dessert? I'm going to show you right now. They're great things to use. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to make the base of the dessert. In there, we're going to use 1 1/3 cup of whole wheat flour. So of course you can use the white flour also, but we're going to use whole wheat. And then we're going to add in 1/4 cup of just white sugar there to make it a little sweet there at the base. And then our baking powder. So that's going to help with the rising of that. And now for the flavors, we have cinnamon. So we just have a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon and then 1/4 teaspoon of salt. All those dry ingredients go into the bowl and we're just going to whisk them quick to mix them up. The recipe in the book calls for margarine, but I'm just using butter. That's what I have. I know a lot of people ask me, what's better, butter, margarine? It doesn't really matter. I would say go with what you like to have and just have it again in moderation. Some people who are more cautious of the amount of saturated fat they would eat, they might opt for the margarine. If anyone hasn't baked before, the terminology here is we want to cut it in as a coarse crumb. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So you can see I cubed up the butter, about 1/2 cup in there, and I'm using a pastry cutter in here and I'm just kind of chopping it up to little bits. The trick with this is if you were to melt that butter and then add it in as a liquid, it could come out a little tough. So what we want to do is make little crumbs of butter that sit in there. And then when it cooks, it has nice little gaps between the flour and the butter. And that makes that kind of nice crumbly, flaky taste. So if you've ever had like a nice pie, that's kind of how they make that pie crust. People who bake a lot know exactly what I'm talking about. But if someone's new to the baking game, I'm just cutting it up, getting the flour, kind of coating that butter. And you can see, if I kind of pull it out here, it might be hard to see, but there's little clumps of butter within that mixture. If you don't get it perfect, it's not necessarily going to change the flavor. It's more of a texture thing. To get it to kind of bind, we're going to use 1 egg. And it goes in. So we're going to give that a stir. And again, we just want that to kind of bind a bit. It's still going to feel a little loose, but that'll change when it's baked. We just want that egg in there a bit to give it a clump. If you're noticing you want to mix it a little better, I just use my hand a bit there. It's going to have like a graininess to it, a little bit. It'll hold a little bit when I pack it down, but it's still a little fluffy. Now we're going to put that into a 9x13 pan. What I did is I put in some parchment paper, and like I've said in videos before, I always give it a grease there because I'd rather it not stick. But what this is going to help do is it's going to help when we get that base and we're ready to cut the chews, we're going to pop it out. I'm going to put these in. I'm going to hold the parchment paper down, just give that a little spread. There, and then I'm going to press that into the pan. You can't see it really well in the video, but what it's doing is it's kind of giving it a bit of a harder texture, so then it's going to press into itself, and then when that butter melts, it's going to be a real nice base for the filling. Alright, so that's ready to go. That goes in the oven, 350 degrees Fahrenheit, just for about 10 minutes until it's firm. I'll be back when that's ready to go. All right, so now we're going to mix up the filling. The filling is the layer of jam. Today we're going to use raspberry jam, and then we're going to make a topping, and that's what I'm going to show you here right now. In our bowl, we're going to put in our ingredients. So we're going to start with our lentils. The lentils, if anyone has never had them before, they're kind of in the same family as the chickpeas, black beans, kidney beans, and people would say, well, why would you put those into a dessert? But the one thing it helps with baking is it really adds a nice texture, it adds a nice richness, and it also gets some moisture in there, which is great. What I did is I took those lentils, they are in kind of a brine, so I give them a rinse to get that salt out. And I took half that can and I put it in my bullet or any type of blender processor. Half a can with 1/2 cup of water and made like a puree. It looks almost like kind of like a thin applesauce, but that's what's going to create that liquid base for us for the topping. So I added that in, and you'll notice when you use it that it doesn't have a strong flavor or a smell, so you can put it into baking, you don't even know it's there. If I didn't tell anybody that this was in there, they wouldn't even realize. Now I'm going to put in my 3/4 cup of brown sugar. And then I'm going to put in 1/4 cup of just a white flour this time. So I know for the base we used whole wheat, but we're just going to use a white flour there. Then we have our baking powder again. This one calls for half a tablespoon. So I'm going to put that in there. And then I'm going to put in the 1/4 teaspoon salt. I'm going to give that a bit of a mixture here just to get it rolling. You want to combine it pretty well. Get all the baking powder flour cover out and make sure the lumps out of the brown sugar are dissolved. I'm going to add in our flavoring. We got some vanilla in there. Just going to add just a little bit there. And then we're going to add in our eggs. So I got 2 beaten eggs here. Throw those in. It's going to be quite wet, and you're going to say, well, how's that going to, harden up in the oven? But it will. The other thing we're going to add in, 2 of my favorite things to eat. We have coconut. We got 3/4 cup of coconut. You can use sweetened or unsweetened. I just pulled out what I had in the pantry, and to be honest, I don't know what it was. The recipe calls for unsweetened because there is some sugar already in that mixture. You might find if you used a sweetened coconut, it might be a little too sweet for you. Add that in, and then the last thing is 1/2 cup of chopped up pecans. You can mix any type of nut in there if you wanted, if you like more walnuts or even almonds. Again, play around with flavorings. You might find you want almond extract in there instead of vanilla. You could even put in some dried fruit in there, really, it wouldn't matter. Once you get more comfortable with cooking, you know which things you can play around with and which things you can't. We have our mixture ready, so what's going to happen, we're going to put the raspberry layer on, and then we're going to put on the topping and then put it in the oven. I've let the pan cool off, and you can see here when I bring it out that the base is really settled in. You can see the little dimples in there. That's from the butter melting. I have my parchment paper. We'll just make it easy to pop out when it's ready to finish off when I get the toppings on. The first thing I do is I want to put on the jam. What I did is I used a 1/4 cup. Now you might find that you need a little more, a little less, but don't worry about that. Just put it in and give it a spread and see how you think. Again, this is raspberry jam. You can use any type of fruit, but you don't want it to be super thick. Like you think, well, more is better, but with this, it's just giving you a bit of flavor, and you're just making a little base for the top part to stick on. Now that might be a little bit too little, so I'm just going to make an adjustment. That's where it's nice to have some flexibility, because you can easily realize, oh, I might need a little more than that. That might be about 1/2 cup, and I think that's fine. I'm just getting a nice even coat of that raspberries in there. I know a lot of clients I have who might be worried about the amount of sugar they have in their day. For example, people who are diabetic. They think, well, how can I change some of my baking to be a little lower sugar? Some ideas for this, you could add a lower sugar jam. Like that's an easy fix. You can find those in the grocery store. You can also play around with how much sugar you add to the recipe. I put in the 3/4 cup of brown sugar. You could easily cut that down. It'd be hard to go down to 0 sugar in that base because you need it for a bit of the structure, but you could even cut it down to, 1/3, 1/4, 1/2, see what you think and how it tastes. And now I'm going to put in the topping. I'm just going to spread around. Again, it's going to be pretty runny, so I would just try to get it as even as I can when I pour it. Just moving it around the pan, get all the spots I've missed. I did have the oven at 375 for the base. When I took out the base, I dropped the oven to 350, and that'll allow us to cook this at a little lower temperature for a little longer to let this top set. I'm going to spread it in to make sure it's kind of covered in there. About 35 minutes in the oven at 350, and we'll be back to try it out. All right, we had the lentil chew bars in the oven for 35 minutes. So you can see here, it really settled nice. It was quite liquidy. You want to make sure that it's cooked the way through. If it's a little too runny, you want to just keep it in the oven a little more, but you don't want it to get too burnt around the edges. If you prefer, you can cut it right out of the pan and take each square out individually, but I put that parchment paper in so I could pull it onto the tray just to make it a little easier for you to see. So you can see it held up pretty good. I'm going to cut into it here. You can make, 1 inch by 2 inch squares. It's going to have a little bit of like an oatmeal type of texture to it, like a baked oat square. So a little thin layer of jam in between the base and that topping. The raspberry gives just enough taste to add that flavor. You get a bit of the sweetness and that nice nuttiness in the coconut and the pecans. So give it a shot. I'd like to hear what you think. If you tried, put something in the comments, see how it turned out. Let me know if you made any substitutions too, because that's really what's important for cooking for different health conditions. You're cooking for different preferences or flavors that you like, so I'd like to hear what you do. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel for recipes and different health topics to discuss in the future. Thank you so much and have a great day.